Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at The Culture Code, The Secrets of Highly Successful Groups by Daniel Coyle.
Awesome.
And this book has a 4.26 star rating on Goodreads,
Oh,
which is really impressive.
that's pretty high.
Yeah, and Coyle, he's a New York Times best-selling author, and he's even advised professional sports teams like the Cleveland Indians. So he clearly knows a thing or two about what makes groups tick.
Absolutely. And in the Culture Code, Coyle, he kind of dives into those forces that shape group dynamics, and
Yeah.
those forces are often invisible.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think about all the groups that you're a part of. Like I'm part of a family, I'm part of, you know, friend groups and obviously work groups. And then you think about like how they actually function, like why do they function the way they do?
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is that Coyle argues that high-performing cultures, they aren't built on some magical formula or inherent talent, you know? It's really about specific skills that can be learned and cultivated by anyone.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what is the first skill that he dives into?
So the foundation of any successful group, Coyle argues, is building safety.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it can't just be about being nice all the time, right?
Right.
I mean, real teamwork involves, tough conversations, disagreements,
Of course.
even conflict, right?
You're absolutely right. And Coyle addresses that head on.
Yeah.
He says it's not about, avoiding conflict. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to express their ideas, challenge those assumptions, and even make mistakes without being afraid of being punished or humiliated.
So it's about creating a space where vulnerability is encouraged, not shunned.
Exactly. And one of the most interesting examples Coyle uses is it's this study where they pit teams of kindergartners against MBA students in a spaghetti marshmallow tower building challenge.
Okay, I'm picturing this in my mind, like little tiny hands grappling with marshmallows, and then like big brains, strategizing over protractors.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. The kindergartners consistently built taller and more stable towers than the MBAs.
Wait, are you serious? What was their secret weapon?
Well, Coyle points out that the MBAs fell into the trap of status management. They were so concerned with who was in charge, who had the best ideas,
Oh, interesting.
and who was going to get the credit that they kind of lost sight of the bigger goal.
They were too busy trying to look smart to actually, be smart.
Exactly. Whereas those kindergartners, they just dove in with enthusiasm, they collaborated freely,
Right.
and they weren't afraid to just experiment.
So the takeaway here is that sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to just get your hands dirty and work together without overthinking it.
That's a great distillation of Coyle's point, and he even has a quote in the book that perfectly captures this. He says, "Great teams are not collections of brilliant minds. They are collections of individuals who trust each other enough to surrender their egos and focus on the collective good."
Okay, I'm sold, but how do we actually, like, create this sense of psychological safety in our own groups?
Right.
Is it just a matter of telling people it's okay to speak up?
It's more than just words. Coyle emphasizes that safety is built through consistent actions and signals.
Okay,
He calls these belonging cues.
belonging cues.
Yeah. And they can be, subtle, like making eye contact, or as grand as creating, shared rituals and traditions.
So it's about creating a culture where people feel seen, heard, and valued, not just for their contributions, but for who they are as people.
Precisely. And that starts with the leaders setting the tone. Coyle highlights the importance of leaders being vulnerable themselves, admitting their mistakes, and actively soliciting feedback.
It's like that saying, lead by example. If the leader is willing to show their human side, it kind of gives other people permission to do the same.
And that creates a ripple effect throughout the group.
Coyle also emphasizes the importance of celebrating those small wins, giving credit generously, and catching people doing things right.
It's about creating that positive feedback loop that reinforces the behaviors you want to see more of.
Absolutely. And one of the most fascinating research findings Coyle shares is that successful teams tend to have a high frequency of short bursts of communication.
So it's not just about having those long formal meetings. It's about those quick check-ins,
Yes.
water cooler conversations.
Exactly. Those moments are really crucial for building that trust and rapport. They're like the connective tissue that holds a group together.
This is making me think about my own team dynamics. Are we creating enough opportunities for those informal connections?
Right.
Are we sending the right belonging cues?
Those are great questions to ask yourself. And remember, the culture code, it's not just about work teams.
Right.
These principles apply to families, friendships, even online communities.
Okay, so we've laid the foundation with building safety. What's the next skill Coyle explores? That would be share vulnerability.
Okay.
And this one might seem a little counterintuitive,
Okay.
especially in a professional setting. But Coyle makes a very compelling case for why vulnerability is actually a strength, not a weakness.
I'm all ears. Tell me more about this radical idea of sharing vulnerability.
Well, first let me ask you this. Have you ever been in a situation where you hesitated to speak up?
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe because you were afraid of looking foolish or being judged?
Yeah, especially when you're new to a group or you're working with people that, you perceive as more experienced or senior.
It's a very natural human reaction, but Coyle argues that this fear of vulnerability can be very toxic to a group's success.
Because if no one's willing to admit that they don't know something or ask for help, then mistakes are more likely to happen and problems can fester under the surface.
Exactly, and one of the most powerful examples Coyle uses to illustrate this point is the story of United Airlines Flight 232, which suffered a catastrophic engine failure in 1989.
I vaguely remember hearing about that incident. It
Yeah.
was a pretty harrowing incident, wasn't it?
It was. The plane was essentially uncontrollable, and the crew was facing an almost impossible situation. But what's remarkable is that they managed to land the plane and save many lives, thanks in large part to their willingness to share vulnerability.
Okay, I'm really curious to hear how that played out. What did they actually do?
Well, instead of trying to be the hero and solve the problem on his own, the captain, Al Haynes, he openly acknowledged the dire situation, and he invited input from everyone on board, including a pilot trainer who just happened to be a passenger.
Wow, that's incredibly humble and courageous. He essentially created a culture of shared responsibility in the midst of a crisis.
Exactly. And by embracing vulnerability, he tapped into the collective wisdom and experience of the group,
Right.
which ultimately helped them avert a complete disaster.
That's an incredible example of how admitting weakness can actually be a strength. It's about recognizing that we all have limitations and that we need each other's help to overcome challenges.
And it sends a powerful message to the group that it's okay to not have all the answers, to ask for help, and to learn from those mistakes.
So it's not just about being vulnerable yourself, it's about creating a culture where vulnerability is valued and rewarded.
Absolutely. And this principle applies to everyday work situations as well. Like, think about giving and receiving feedback.
Right.
Coyle argues that the most effective feedback is delivered in person,
Okay.
with a focus on clarity, empathy, and a shared desire for improvement.
So ditch the email and have those tough conversations face to face.
Exactly. It allows for nuance, clarification, and, the opportunity to build connection, even amidst challenging feedback.
Yeah.
And one of the techniques Coyle highlights is framing negative feedback in a way that emphasizes high expectations.
So instead of saying, you messed up this report,
Yeah.
you might say, I know you're capable of producing excellent work, and I'm confident you can do better next time.
It's a subtle but powerful shift. It shows that you believe in that person's potential,
Right.
even when they've made a mistake.
It's a way of saying, I'm not giving up on you,
Right.
and I'm here to support your growth.
This is making me think about how I give and receive feedback.
Yeah.
Do I approach those conversations with a spirit of vulnerability and a desire to learn and grow? Or do I kind of shy away from them or get defensive?
Those are great questions to reflect on. And remember, vulnerability isn't just about admitting weaknesses. It's also about celebrating those strengths
Right.
and acknowledging each other's
This
contributions.
is about creating a balanced and nuanced view of ourselves and each other, recognizing that we're all works in progress.
Exactly. And when we can embrace that, we create a much more supportive and productive environment where everyone feels safe to take risks, try new things, and learn from their mistakes.
I'm really loving these practical insights. So we've got build safety and share vulnerability. What's the third key skill for creating a high-performing group culture?
The final piece of the puzzle is to establish purpose.
And this goes beyond just having a mission statement hanging on the wall. It's about creating an environment where everyone understands the why behind their work
Right.
and feels a sense of connection to something bigger than themselves.
So it's about connecting the dots between individual tasks and the overall mission of the group.
Exactly. And Coyle highlights the importance of storytelling in this process. He uses the example of Johnson & Johnson's Tylenol crisis in 1982,
Okay.
when some Tylenol capsules were laced with cyanide.
That was a huge scandal. I remember hearing about it. How did they recover from that?
Their CEO at the time, James Burke, made this really bold and costly decision to recall all Tylenol products,
Wow.
even though it cost them millions of dollars.
Wow, that's putting your money where your mouth is.
It was. And it wasn't just about protecting the company's bottom line.
Right.
It was about staying true to their core purpose, which was prioritizing the safety and well-being of their customers above all else.
And that act of courage and integrity ultimately saved the company and reinforced their reputation for ethical leadership.
And it became a powerful story that was passed down through the organization, reinforcing their values
Right.
and reminding everyone of their shared commitment to doing the right thing, even when it's hard.
So it's about turning those defining moments into teachable moments that shape the culture and inspire future generations.
And Coyle also emphasizes the importance of creating tangible symbols and rituals that embody the group's purpose.
Okay.
He uses the example of the SEAL headquarters, which is filled with artifacts and memorials that constantly remind them of their mission and the sacrifices that have been made.
It's about creating a physical space that embodies the group's values and inspires a sense of shared identity.
And it's not just about those physical spaces, it's about how you communicate and reinforce purpose in every interaction, every decision, every action.
So it's about weaving purpose into the fabric of the group's everyday experience.
Exactly. And another great example Coyle uses is Pixar's culture. They've created an environment where everyone is encouraged to contribute ideas, and they're not afraid to iterate and refine until they achieve excellence.
Yeah, they're famous for their rigorous feedback process.
Yeah,
Those brain trust meetings sound pretty intense.
they can be.
Yeah.
But they're also incredibly effective because they're all about pushing each other to do their best work in service of the story.
So it's not about ego or personal agenda. It's about collective ownership and a shared commitment to excellence.
And Coyle emphasizes that this culture of excellence isn't just about producing great films, it's about creating an environment where people feel safe to take risks, experiment, and learn from their mistakes.
It's about fostering that growth mindset that we talked about earlier.
Sharing vulnerability.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating concept because it
Yeah.
seems so counterintuitive, especially in those professional settings,
Mhm.
where we're often conditioned to project competence and confidence.
Right. It's almost like you think that being vulnerable would be seen as a weakness.
Right.
But Coyle argues that it's actually the key to unlocking a group's true potential. And it's about creating an environment where it's safe to admit mistakes, ask for help, and learn from each other.
Exactly. And he doesn't just throw this idea out there without backing it up. He shares some really compelling examples of
Exactly.
how vulnerability has been instrumental in the success of high-performing groups.
Okay.
One story that really stands out is the one about the U.S. Navy's nuclear submarine program back in the 1980s.
Okay, submarines, vulnerability. This sounds like an unlikely pairing.
Right.
What
Yeah.
happened?
Well, at the time, the Navy was facing a serious problem with its submarine fleet. There were a number of accidents and near misses, and it was clear that something needed to change.
Right.
So they brought in a new admiral, Hyman Rickover,
Okay.
and he was known for his, demanding standards
Okay.
and his very unconventional approach to leadership.
So what did Rickover do differently?
He completely overhauled the culture of the submarine program.
Okay.
And one of the key changes he made was to create an environment where it was not only acceptable,
No.
but expected
Wow.
for officers to admit when they didn't know something or
Yeah.
when they made a mistake.
Wow, that's a pretty radical shift, especially in a military context
Yeah.
where hierarchy and authority are so deeply ingrained.
It was, but Rickover, he understood that in a high-stakes environment like a nuclear submarine,
Right.
mistakes could be catastrophic.
Yeah.
And he knew that the best way to prevent them was to create a culture where people felt safe to speak up and raise concerns without fear of reprisal.
So he basically flipped the script on traditional military culture.
He did.
Instead of punishing mistakes, he encouraged people to learn from them.
Exactly. And the results were pretty astonishing. Under Rickover's leadership, the Navy's nuclear submarine program achieved this unprecedented level of safety and performance. They went from having a series of accidents to operating for over 2 decades without a single major incident.
That's incredible. That's an incredible testament to the power of vulnerability.
It is.
It shows that when you create a culture where it's safe to admit mistakes, you can actually improve performance and prevent disasters.
And this principle applies to all kinds of groups,
Right.
not just military units.
Yeah.
Think about your own experiences. Have you ever been in a situation where you were afraid to speak up? because he didn't want to look stupid or rock the boat.
Absolutely. I think we've all been there at some point, especially when you're new to a team or working with people that you perceive as more, senior or experienced.
It's a very natural human tendency.
Yeah.
But the problem is that when we let that fear silence us,
Mm-hmm.
we miss out on opportunities to learn and grow and contribute our best work.
Right. So how do we overcome this fear of vulnerability?
Yeah.
What are some practical steps that we can take to create a safer space for ourselves and others to speak up?
One thing Coyle recommends is to practice what he calls framing.
Okay.
And it's about consciously choosing how we interpret
Okay.
and respond to situations.
Okay. Give me an example of how that works in practice.
Okay, let's say you're in a meeting and someone criticizes your idea. Your immediate reaction might be to get defensive
Right.
or shut down. But if you can reframe that situation as an opportunity to learn and improve, you can kind of shift your perspective and respond in a much more constructive way.
So instead of seeing it as a personal attack, you can see it as a chance to get valuable feedback and make your idea even better.
And it's not just about receiving feedback, it's also about giving it in a way that's both honest and supportive.
Mm-hmm.
Coyle suggests focusing on specific behaviors rather than making generalizations about someone's character.
So instead of saying you're always late,
Yeah.
you might say, I noticed that you were late to the last 3 meetings. Is there anything going on that's preventing you from being on time?
It's a subtle but important distinction. By focusing on those observable behaviors, you can avoid making assumptions
Right.
and create a much more objective and constructive conversation.
This reminds me of a quote from Brene Brown, she's a leading researcher on vulnerability.
Yeah,
And she says, vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
It really captures the essence of what Coyle's talking about. It takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, to admit when we don't have all the answers, and to ask for help.
And that courage can be contagious, When we see other people being vulnerable, it gives us permission to do the same.
Right.
And that can create this ripple effect of trust and connection.
Throughout the group.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individual vulnerability.
Right.
It's also about creating systems and processes that encourage and reward vulnerability.
Okay. Can you give me an example of what that might look like?
So Coyle talks about the importance of after-action reviews, or AARs,
Okay.
which are a common practice in the military and in some high-performing organizations.
Okay. I've heard of ARs, but I never really understood how they work. What's the basic idea?
After every mission or project, the team gets together to debrief,
Okay.
what went well, what could have been better, and what they learned. And the key here is that it's not about assigning blame or pointing fingers. It's about creating that safe space for honest reflection
Okay.
and collective learning.
So it's a chance for everyone to share their perspective, even if they made a mistake,
Yeah.
without fear of being judged or punished.
Exactly. And the leader plays a crucial role in setting the tone for these AARs. They need to be willing to admit their own mistake and encourage others to do the same.
It sounds like AARs are a great way to build trust and foster a culture of continuous improvement.
They are, and they can be adapted for any kind of group, not just military or professional teams. Think about using them with your family after a vacation
That's a great idea.
or with your friends after a big event. And that's really what the culture code is all about.
Yeah.
It's about creating that shared sense of purpose and connection.
Mm-hmm.
And vulnerability is an essential ingredient in that process.
Well said. So we've covered building safety and sharing vulnerability. What's the third key skill for creating a high-performing group culture?
The final piece of the puzzle is establish purpose. And this is about more than just having a mission statement or a set of goals.
Right.
It's about creating a shared understanding of why the group exists.
So it's about connecting the dots between individual tasks and the bigger picture.
Exactly. And Coyle emphasizes that purpose, it isn't something that can be imposed from the top down,
Right.
It needs to be co-created and embraced by everyone in the group.
So how do we go about establishing a shared sense of purpose? Is it just a matter of, having a team meeting and brainstorming some ideas?
It's more than just brainstorming. It's about telling stories, creating rituals,
Okay.
and celebrating successes in a way that reinforces the group's values and aspirations.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these 3 skills,
Yeah.
building safety, sharing vulnerability, and establishing purpose, they're all interconnected.
They are.
They work together to create a culture where people feel connected, valued, and inspired to do their best work.
Exactly. And Coyle doesn't just talk about these skills in the abstract. Right. He provides concrete examples of how they've been applied in a wide range of settings, the military to the business world to the arts.
I'm really enjoying how he weaves together research, anecdotes, and practical advice.
Mm-hmm.
It's making me think about my own experiences
Yeah.
and how I can apply these principles to my own life.
I'm having that same experience, and I think that's one of the strengths of the culture code.
Mm-hmm.
It's both insightful and actionable.
Right.
It gives us a framework for understanding how groups work
Okay.
and a set of tools for building stronger, more effective cultures. Coyle argues that purpose is the driving force behind any successful group. It's what gives people that sense of meaning and motivation.
Yeah.
It's what helps them overcome challenges and achieve those extraordinary results.
And he doesn't just talk about purpose in some vague, abstract way.
Right.
He provides concrete examples of how high-performing groups establish and reinforce their purpose.
Right.
One example that really struck me was the story of the San Antonio Spurs, one of the most successful teams in NBA history.
The Spurs are a fascinating case study, you know?
Yeah.
They've consistently achieved excellence over decades, despite not always having, like, the most talented players on paper.
Right.
So what's their secret?
Well, Coyle argues that it's their unwavering commitment to a shared purpose, which he describes as a culture of humility and discipline.
Okay.
They prioritize teamwork, hard work, and a constant focus on improvement
Right.
over individual ego and flashy displays of talent.
And that purpose is reflected in everything they do,
Right.
from their rigorous training regimen to their, selfless style of play.
Right.
They've created a system where everyone understands their role
Mm.
and how it contributes to the team's overall success.
And it's not just about winning championships.
Right.
Their purpose extends beyond the basketball court.
It does.
They're known for their commitment to community service and their strong family-like bond within the organization.
That's a great point. Their purpose goes beyond just achieving those specific outcomes, you know?
This makes me think about how we often talk about, company culture in the business world, but it's often more about perks and benefits than a true sense of purpose. It seems like the Spurs have managed to create a culture that goes much deeper than that.
Absolutely. And Coyle emphasizes that establishing purpose, it isn't just about coming up with some catchy mission statement.
Right.
It's about actively shaping the group's experiences and behaviors in a way that reinforces that purpose.
So it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. And one of the key ways to do this is through storytelling.
Okay.
Coyle argues that stories are incredibly powerful tools for shaping culture and transmitting values.
I love good stories. So how does this work in practice?
Well, think about how we learn about history and culture.
Yep.
We don't just memorize facts and figures.
Right.
We learn through stories about real people, right?
And their experiences.
Right. Stories make things so relatable and memorable.
Exactly. And they help us understand the why behind things.
Right.
The motivations, the challenges, the triumphs.
So how can leaders use stories to establish purpose?
Coyle suggests that leaders should actively collect and share stories that exemplify the group's values and aspirations. These could be stories about individuals who went above and beyond, or stories about times when the group faced adversity and overcame it.
And it's not just about telling these stories once.
Right.
It's about weaving them into the fabric of the group's everyday conversations,
Exactly.
interactions.
These stories become part of the group's shared narrative,
Right.
reinforcing their purpose and reminding them of what they're capable of achieving.
And I imagine it helps new members quickly understand the group's culture and values.
Absolutely. It's like giving them a shortcut to understanding what the group stands for and what's expected of them.
Another point Coyle makes is that purpose needs to be tangible and actionable.
It can't just be some lofty ideal that no one really understands how to put into practice.
That's a great point. And one of the ways to make purpose more concrete is to create rituals and symbols.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What kind of rituals and symbols are we talking about here?
Well, think about things like team cheers,
Okay.
company slogans, or even something as simple as a shared coffee break ritual.
I can see how those seemingly small things can actually carry a lot of meaning
They do.
and help create a sense of shared identity.
Exactly. And it's not just about creating new rituals, it's also about paying attention to the rituals that already exist within the group and making sure they're aligned with that desired purpose.
So if a team has a tradition of, going out for drinks every Friday night,
Right.
but their purpose is all about health and wellness,
Right.
that might be something to reconsider.
Exactly. It's about making sure that the group's actions and behaviors are consistent
Mhm.
with their stated values and aspirations.
Okay, so we've talked about storytelling, rituals, and symbols.
Mm.
Are there any other key takeaways for establishing purpose?
Coyle also emphasizes the importance of celebrating successes
Okay.
in a way that reinforces the group's purpose.
So it's not just about recognizing individual achievements, it's
Yeah.
about connecting those achievements to the group's overall mission and values.
Exactly. And it's about making sure that the celebrations are meaningful and memorable.
Okay.
Think about things like team awards, public acknowledgments, or even just taking a few minutes at the end of a meeting
Mhm.
to reflect on what went well and why.
This is really making me think about how we celebrate success in my own team. Are we doing it in a way that reinforces our shared purpose and motivates us to keep striving for excellence?
That's a great question to reflect on. And remember, establishing purpose is an ongoing process.
Right?
It's not something you do once and then forget about it.
Right.
It requires constant attention and reinforcement.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the culture code, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface of what it has to offer.
I agree.
It's such a rich and insightful book, packed with practical advice and compelling stories.
I completely agree. And I think one of the most important takeaways is that building a great culture isn't about some magical formula
Right.
or a one-time event.
Mhm.
It's about consistently practicing those three key skills: building safety, sharing vulnerability, and establishing purpose.
And it's about being intentional and deliberate in how we shape our group experiences,
Exactly.
from the way we communicate, to the rituals we create, to the stories we tell.
Exactly. And the great thing is that these skills can be learned and applied in any kind of group, whether it's a work team, a family, a community organization, or even just a group of friends.
So if you're inspired to learn more and start building those stronger, more effective cultures in your own life, we highly recommend checking out the Culture Code. We'll include a link in the description where you can purchase a copy. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please leave a comment below and let us know what other books you'd like us to explore.
And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into fascinating topics. We'll be back soon with a new episode.
Awesome.
Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep building those incredible connections.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. See you next time.